Welcome to the FAST Podcast, your go-to source for financial advisor strategy talks. Hosted by myself, Candace Burns, the lead creative designer on the marketing team at White Glove. And with me, I have Dean Thurman, co-founder of both White Glove and InvestWise Financial. Join us as we dive into valuable insights from industry experts, providing actionable tips to accelerate your success. Thank you for joining another episode of the FAST Podcast with myself, Candace, and with me I have Dean, as always, and we have a great guest for you today. We have David Wood, who founded Gateway Financial Partners in 1994 and is currently the Chief Visionary Officer. Over the decades, David has had many accomplishments as a leader and an entrepreneur that has set him up to be quite the influential figure in the financial industry. So, David, thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you.
It's my pleasure. It's great to be here.
David, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Last time we met, you were in the outbacks of Mexico, dodging all kinds of cactuses and drug runners, and it was a wild time. So you're a high energy. What's that?
Couple of cows.
Couple of cows. Yeah, it was a good time driving those Baja 1000 buggies with you, buddy. So
That was a good time.
I really wanted David to join us on the podcast because I don't know anybody that has more experience and knowledge when it comes to the different ways that advisors set up their practices, merge with other companies, leverage their network as they kind of grind through the career and eventually sunset it a little bit. Some people start as solo practitioners, then an ensemble, then they might go through a merger and acquisition or something. So David is an expert in that space. I think we all want to face these types of questions sometimes in our career. And David is an expert. So David, what can you tell us a little bit about your experience, your knowledge around building a practice and eventually merging or selling it?
So, Dean, I think here's the big thing. So, we've been in the business for 35 years. We've been doing this for a long time. But when I look at where the industry is, I think there's more change happening today in financial services than ever before. And I think that change really creates more opportunity today than has ever existed. And if we think back to, when you and I started in this industry, we saw change between, say, the 1990s and the 2000s and the 2000s, the 2010s. We saw some changes, which was the advent of ETFs, pricing changes. But we'll look at the last 5 years and we look at how the industry has changed. I think it's just amazing. I think there's really, as I see it, three factors that are really driving some of the growth and opportunity for financial advisors. And that is one, the changes in how advisors can affiliate with firms. If we think back 30 years ago as a typical, broker-dealer model, and we look today how that model has really changed and evolved. So I think we've got a change in how advisors are affiliating. 50% of the broker-dealers over the last 15 years, 50% have disappeared through some type of merger or acquisition. So there's a lot less choices out there. Financial Planning runs their top 50 broker-dealer list every year, and this year they couldn't even put 50 firms on the list. So I think it goes to show how, right, there's this big consolidation of firms. We've got all of this advent of new RIA types of models or hybrid types of models that are coming about. I think we're very close to seeing over the next couple of years the first $1 trillion RIA that's out there in assets.
$1 trillion?
Oh,
wow!
And what you're going to see, Dean, I think you're going to see some of this consolidation of a very, very fragmented industry right now. So I'll give you an example. If we look at the kind of the high net worth space, who's the dominant player in the high net worth space right now? What firm?
You tell me.
Merrill
You're the
Lynch.
expert.
Merrill Lynch.
Merrill Lynch. Okay, that makes sense.
But let's go through this. Here's the amazing part. What market share do you think Merrill Lynch has
currently?
Yeah.
Too much.
What's too much? What percent?
I'm an independent, so we're trying to take their clients.
but what percentage of the market share do you think they have?
I would say 17.5%.
And Candace, what do you think?
Oh my gosh, I have no idea. My sister works for Merrill Lynch.
Okay.
Oh well, we'll stay away from her clients.
I think
then.
maybe I would know something, but
it's 2%, right? So we've got an incredibly fragmented industry. So we've got a fragmented industry, number one. The second factor is that more people than ever need financial advice. So we all know the statistics: 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day. So we've got this big need for advice. We've got big changes in how advisors can affiliate, and then we throw in what I really think makes the perfect storm, and that's a third of our industry is going to retire in the next 10 years. So we put
Well,
all
say
this
that
together.
again. Sorry to interrupt, David, but
Yeah,
a third. Say that again.
a third of our industry is going to retire in the next 10 years.
That's a huge statement, and that's kind of at the crux of this whole, podcast episode. Is what do these people that are thinking about retiring, and they might be 15 years away from retiring, but what I hear is a lot of them are kind of adjusting their practice now to prepare for that. But a third retiring, and that's accelerating. So,
Right, and
what
then
are
the
the
next, and then,
options that somebody? Yeah, go for it.
well, the next challenge with all those people retiring is we've got a bigger need, and then we don't have enough financial advisors getting into the industry. So, like when we started, I think the barrier to entries are still low, but it's very hard to build a book of business. When you and I started in this industry, we could sell a mutual fund and make an 8.5% commission, and that was the normal front end load on a mutual fund. And if we did that today, we'd go to jail. So I think part of it is, right, we look at that pricing compression in a fee-based advisory type of environment. Without some type of kickstart for new financial advisors, I think it's very, very difficult for folks to get in. So I think part of what we're seeing is in order to get that next generation in, one of the big keys is, I think, to find older advisors. I was at a conference in Philadelphia a couple weeks ago, and someone asked me, how are we having this success at getting next generation advisors in, and how do you do it? And I said, you find the old advisors, right? So if you find those old advisors, and I think one of the things that I've really seen in this industry, I think there's this big segment of these older advisors that retired 5 years ago. They just didn't tell anybody, right? So they've slowed down. They're not keeping up with technology. And when I look at how AI and I think really two things. One, how AI is going to affect this industry, but also I think the clients have a much higher expectation for the client experience, and I think that that's becoming very, very hard for those solo advisors to really accomplish. So when I look at financial services, I think one of the tipping points that we're kind of in is very similar to what happened with doctors. If you go back to 2002, 75% of doctors own their own practice, and 25% work for a hospital and aggregator. And when you look at that doctor in 2002, uh, what did that doctor practice look like? It looked very much like a small financial advisor or a small ensemble financial advisor practice. It was an advisor, maybe a physician's assistant, right? So we have a paraplanner, and then we had some type of administrative help, very similar to the doctors. If you go 9 years later, 2011, those numbers flip flop. So 75% of the physicians were working for some type of aggregator, and 25% were still owning their practice. Today, I think very, very few doctors own their practice. I think part of what that transformation, I see so many similarities in financial services where the solo advisors and the small ensemble practices are under so much pressure to do more. I think it's very, very hard to scale that. So I think partnering with firms and partnering with organizations that bring more scale, and I look at your success with White Glove as a way for advisors to outsource part of their marketing activities. A firm like ours, we're helping advisors outsource, really, we call it the front and middle office resources that an advisor needs. So I think one of the trends that we're really seeing is advisors really need to keep up. And I think now is an environment where I think a segment of this industry has their head in the sand and isn't really keen to how quickly things are changing. I flew in this morning. I landed at 3 o'clock this morning and got back from a conference, a 3-day conference in Florida, where the talk is all about technology, AI, and M&A, and how all of these factors are really disrupting the whole industry right now.
Well, David, that's a lot of information there. I mean, it just goes to show how complex and how much things are changing for just a regular guy or woman um, who just wanted to be a financial advisor. Let's talk some numbers. Let's talk some dollars and cents a little bit. Let's say that there's an advisor out there. and he is 50 years old. He's been an advisor for 25 years. Maybe he has a son or daughter that's getting into the business.
Mhm.
He doesn't really want to do it so much anymore. He's got, let's say, $75 million assets under advisory. What are the challenges that he's looking at when he starts thinking about what his practice can look like moving into the future, so he can best serve his clients and still be true to the next generation that he wants to bring in? And then I'd ask you the same example of somebody that doesn't have a succession plan already in place with a relative or an employee that's working there. What are their challenges and what are their opportunities, and what kind of dollars are we talking about that they could look at?
Sure. So I think when we look at valuations, we read about the valuations in the industry press of these large firms that are merging and being sold, many cases to private equity. So if we look so far this year in the industry, and we're here in May, there's been about 150 deals, and about 75% of those are made by private equity backed aggregators.
Mm.
So part of this is what does that practice look like, and what does the firm look like? Because there's a big valuation difference between the solo advisor who has 75 million and the well-scaled firm that has 750 million or 7.5 billion, right? So the valuation differentials here, as those practices get bigger, the valuations go way up. But there's a few reasons for that. One is those larger firms typically have way more infrastructure in place, so much better client experience, the ability to scale, better processes. These are things that, in many cases, in the smaller practices, the advisors are lacking. I would say to that advisor who is contemplating the future, one, I think the sooner you can get next generation talent into the practice, I think often the easier it is to survive. And when I say survive, one of the shocking things to me is there's very little organic growth in our industry. So look at the last 10 years, organic growth has only been about 3%. Now, advisors get deceived into growth, and I'll tell you how they get deceived into growth. They get deceived into it because they have an environment where the market goes up 25% like it did last year, and their revenues grow 10%, and they think that business is good. But in reality, so much of their growth is really due to market performance. So when we look at this, there's not a lot of organic growth. So one, I think there's a lot of risk for older advisors who don't have some type of succession plan. And we've got next gen advisors that are using their young age, they're using their youth and inexperience to compete against older advisors. And here's one of the ways that they're doing it. If I'm a 60-year-old advisor, I think I have a increasingly hard a time attracting the 40 or 50-year-old client. And one of the things that we're seeing with our next gen advisors is their comment is, well, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here in 5 or 10 years when you retire. I'm going to be here for you, and I'm going to be 40 or 50 years old when you need me the most, which is in your early retirement years. So I think this aging generation of advisors, those advisors are not uh, are not attracting, one, I think, all the clients' assets, but two, not attracting those next gen clients because there's not some perceived succession plan. So I think the sooner that there's a succession plan in place or younger talent within those firms, there's a lot more success. We've been
Let
very,
me
very,
ask you something about that, David, if I could. I mean,
yeah.
it's so funny you say that. Obviously, I still do a lot of seminars as
Mhm.
co-founder of White Glove, and also practicing financial advisor. And we have 4 advisors in our practice under the age of 30. And what I'm finding is their closing ratios are actually higher than the closing ratios of those of us that are in their 50s. I'm shocked by it. I just noticed that over the last year. I was uh, saying the same things that you just said internally in our office. I was shocked by it. You're the first person that I've heard actually address that,
Mhm.
and you couldn't be more spot on with that. The old adage of you want an old attorney and a young doctor. People also want young advisors, is what it sounds like. So couldn't
Wait,
agree
wait,
with you more on that.
I think that that's it. So I mean, I sit and look. Number one, there's 60-year-old advisors that look like they're 80, and there's 60-year-old advisors that look like they're 40, right? So I think that these older advisors are struggling, and I've met your young team, and it doesn't surprise me that they're successful in that closing, because the clients, prospective clients, look at that and they know that those advisors are going to be here for a long time, and they also know they're part of a larger organization. I think all of those things bring comfort to that relationship. We've helped about 30 advisors make acquisitions in the last 3 years, and I'll share a couple of real life examples of what we've seen. We have an advisor that acquired a practice. He actually acquired two practices last October in the Chicago area. One of those practices, he's going to 3x the revenues in the first year that he's owned the practice. He's going to
Wow.
3x the revenues in one
How
year.
does he do that?
It's real simple. So part of this is, if you look at the makeup of the seller was a 70-year-old seller
Mm.
who was not using technology, didn't have a very good client experience, didn't have a great service model, had very weak processes internally. And when we fix all of that overnight by having a big marketing team, big operations team, technology, we came in day one and completely changed the client experience. So here's what that led to. That advisor actually got a $7 million check this week from a $80,000 client. So it was an $80,000 client that he purchased, and he got a $7 million check when the client sold his business.
Wow.
He has
Amazing.
another client that
Yeah.
had 900,000 with the advisor, and after two or three meetings, brought over another 2.8 from another firm. So what we see is that client experience is really, really important. I think the older advisors, especially the solo or the small ensemble practices, are struggling to provide that experience the way that the scaled organizations can. And when it happens, we see a big attraction of those new assets. So part of it, one, is really change the client experience. Technology is a big part of that. Um, but when you look at what marketing is really providing a client experience at scale. And when you do that, um, these advisors are attracting substantially more assets. So when we start to look at those acquisitions, the money is really made when you can make an inorganic acquisition and then grow it organically. That's where the money is really made. A
My
lot of
guess
these.
is if somebody's like, pivoting out of the business at 70, they probably were, and with all due respect, somewhat sleepwalking through their practice for the last 10 or 15 years. And just,
Mhm.
you know, they get that recurring revenue. I mean, we all do it to some degree. And then you stop really, looking at your practice as something that, just mentally, as something that you want to grow and invest in, and you're real ambitious about. You really, obviously you still want to do a good job, but that looks a little bit different in your 60s than it did in your 30s, when you really are looking for, a great reputation and going above and beyond. Once you've already established your practice and you have that good relationship with your clients, it's pretty easy to take your foot off the accelerator a little bit and, like I say, sleepwalk through it. So somebody coming in and buying that practice or merging or some form of that, and I'd like you to go through a couple of the different options that maybe that 70-year-old was looking at. I mean, there's the sell and stay. There's the partnering up with another group. Sometimes you switch broker dealers or FMOs. Sometimes you don't, or an RIA. What do some of those options look like? And could you go through some of the pros and cons? Because certainly somebody that has a $75 million practice that's getting up late in their career has more than one option. So I'd be real curious as to your opinion on just an outright sale versus a sell and stay. And most people don't have that next generation, succession plan. So what are their options? Because, I hate to be crass, but they could die at any day. I mean, any of us could,
Mhm.
but it's more likely when you're, a bit older.
Right.
You could die any day, or just get fed up with it. And quite frankly, a lot of these older folks, and I won't quite put myself in that category, but I'll be 57 this year. And you alluded to it earlier. Our regulation environment looks a lot different now than it did back in the day. And you really have a lot more continuing education, a much more, and rightfully so, compliance department, and very aggressive regulators, which also in many cases rightfully so. So some people are just sick of it. They sleepwalk through their practice, and now it's time to go into the final stages. What are the pros and
So
cons of
so so so
people's
you touched
options?
upon those regulatory things. So here's the big difference that I really see, Dean, is that the ability for an advisor 10 or 15 or 20 years ago to coast into retirement. I heard this so many times. Why sell? Why sell? I'll just continue to collect my trails. Why sell it? And those factors that you mentioned, the regulatory environment, the need to keep up with technology, these are all things that put pressure on that advisor, right? Direct pressure. But there's a whole nother piece of pressure. And the pressure is, I'm going to use White Glove as an example. The pressure is what White Glove does. So what White Glove does is it's finding those retirees and plucking them away from that 70-year-old advisor who hasn't talked about Social Security, hasn't talked about planning, and those clients feel that they're looking for more and they want other options. So they attend the seminar, and marketing is attracting these people away. And when they see the 30 or 40 or 50-year-old advisor or team like you have, which is the best of both worlds, I've got a 50, 57-year-old advisor and I've got a 30-year-old advisor working together as a team to collaboratively help me and then also help my family long term. So you're not only preparing the money for the kids, but you're also helping prepare the kids for the money, right? So you're here now as a generational tool to keep those assets long term. If I'm the next gen, we look at the statistics. Very few of those next gen clients, whether it's the wife of a husband that had passed away or the children of parents that passed away, very few of those relationships keep their financial advisor. So I think one of the things that you're doing now by having a co-advisor working with you is you're helping preserve the value of your practice by making it intergenerational and then keeping those assets for that next generation. So this is one of the challenges that these older advisors have is they're under a lot of pressure because their practice as clients are getting older and passing away, taking RMDs, they've got a declining asset, right? As those clients get older, they're spending that money. They're no longer in accumulation phase. So I think we're really in an environment where it's either grow or there's going to be continued pressure put on these financial advisors. And the pressure is one regulatory, but then the second thing becomes the marketing side. So what's an advisor do? I think one of the key things, if you're not ready to outright sell, is a sell and stay. I think it's one of the best and often overlooked options that advisors have. In a sell and stay, an advisor would sell part of their practice today, maybe 65 or 75% of the practice they would sell today, but they would bring in a co-advisor, a younger advisor to buy that business and then help them preserve and grow. I've got an 83-year-old advisor with our organization who's been here for 30 years who did a sell and stay 5 or 6 years ago. And he continues to tell me it was the best move he ever made because he can still be active in the business, right? He wants to be here. He wants to continue to add value. A lot of advisors love what they do and they don't want to retire. They've got a servant mentality. They want to provide financial advice to clients. They're not ready to walk away and go off into the sunset, but they also know that they need some younger talent. So I think a sell and stay for both the buyer and the seller is a very attractive way to have that succession plan. But most importantly, so many advisors don't have that succession plan. So anybody that doesn't, I would encourage them to immediately put something in place because this is something where very often the largest asset that a financial advisor has built is the value of their practice, and they want to make sure that they've got a insurance plan, which I think often a sell and stay does, but they've got a plan in place. One, should something happen, and I think that that's for every advisor. Even that 40 or 30-year-old advisor should have some type of contingency plan in place, should they get hit by the proverbial bus. But certainly as age goes on, it becomes more and more important. But again, I think the competitive pressures of the industry, if you want to preserve that asset that you have, One is you got to look at the growth, because when you look at these firms that are getting these higher valuations, they're getting the higher valuations because they've had higher growth. And that becomes part of what these buyers are asking. They're asking the questions about, not only the assets, but they're also asking the questions about your internal processes, the client experience, and then also the growth that you've had. And if there's no growth there and you've got a bunch of older clients, those are practices that really aren't worth a lot. If there's really strong technology and integrated processes and a great client experience, those are the practices that are getting those higher dollar values. So one of the things, and I don't think that this is just for the older advisors, but I think advisors in general, uh, we're going to see continued mass consolidation among, one, I think these big national aggregators, your Allsworth, Beacon Point, Creative Planning, Mariner. We're going to see more consolidation into those aggregating firms. And we're also going to see, I think, aggregation among the aggregators to create that $1 trillion RIA.
Mm.
But I think what we're also going to see is we're going to see more of the solo advisors, going back to the solo doctors, joining firms like yours, joining firms like ours. We really provide a full range. I think in general, we're not looking for the doctor or the financial advisor to sell to us. We do have an equity alignment program, but we're not looking for them to sell. We want to support independent advisors, but give them the scale to outsource all of those non-revenue producing activities. So similar to what White Glove is doing, White Glove provides the ability for an advisor to outsource a very specific piece of marketing, right? They're not outsourcing everything to White Glove, but I think the success, when you look at the doctors, and my neighbor's a doctor, very, very successful doctor. All he does is see patients. He's not dealing with all of these other complexities of the business, the technology, the HR, the marketing. He's not dealing with all this. All he's doing is he's seeing the patients. And I think that that's one of the big changes that we're going to see in financial services is the financial advisor needs to spend more time in front of the client and less time doing all of those other administrative tasks. I think part of what is happening is that's kind of forcing those solo and small ensemble practices. And even now, some of the larger practices, we merged with a $3 billion RIA 2 years ago because, again, there's a $3 billion RIA that was struggling to get enough scale. So I think this
Mm.
fragmentation is going to really start to consolidate up the
And how
same
does an
way that the
advisor
broker
take
dealers.
advantage of that, David? As all this is happening, how do they, the 60-year-old advisor, how would he or she take advantage of all this opportunity that you're talking about? What would you do if you were them?
So I think it's about finding the right partner. So I think there was a great question asked yesterday at a panel on mergers and acquisitions at this conference in Florida. Was how do you make the firm not grow into the wirehouse? And I think some of these large RIAs are going to grow back into the kind of the wirehouse mentality as they get bigger. Here's one of the real interesting things about independence. So you mentioned, boy, I don't want to be at Merrill Lynch. I don't want that employee model. The wirehouses are losing a substantial amount of their financial advisors to independent models. But I think one of the challenges with independent models is there's often too much independence, right? We go from having all of these services provided to us with a good process, and all of our technology is provided, our administrative support, marketing, all of this stuff is provided. And then we go to independence where now we have to figure that out all on their own. I think there's definitely a happy medium there. So the happy medium is I think firms like ours, and there's a number of other organizations within the industry that are allowing advisors to remain independent, but then outsource all of those non-revenue producing activities with a lot more scale. I think that ultimately leads to a lot more growth. When I look at the advisors that we've had that have made these acquisitions, they've really relied on our marketing team, our operations team to help them get through all of those processes of those acquisitions and then ultimately grow. So I think advisors in all stages of their career right now, I think they really need to focus on scale. I'm shocked at the number of state registered RAAs that are popping up every year. I mean, there's thousands of state registered RAAs. I think the last number I saw, there's 15,000 RAAs that have less than $100 million. And I think that that's a trend that's just going to go away. It's going to be like the doctor that that tried to maintain an independence and do everything out on his own. I just don't think that that's going to be the way of the future. I think the way of the future is to find a partner that you can align with that gives you the independence that you want without being completely alone and having to do everything by yourself. And I think that that's one of the challenges that advisors are going to face moving forward.
So, David, I have a question then coming from, a lot of this, I kind of sit as a fly on the wall. It's very interesting and I can learn a ton from both of you. But I feel like we're talking a lot about advice that or answers, that you would give to these maybe higher, like older advisors. But if we can focus a little bit more on the next gen advisors, which I feel like is what you kind of were just touching on, is what advice would you give a next gen or a younger advisor that's getting in? It sounds like the perfect plan would be to partner up with somebody who already has that book of business, but where would you push somebody to start in that journey to find someone?
Right. So that's an awesome question. So I think one, when we start to look at some of the demographics of the industry, I think we're going to see a lot more financial advisors who are women. So I think women financial advisors in the next 10 years are going to be one of the fastest growing segments of new advisors. And I say that because, Dean and I grew up in this business selling product to people. That's how we grew up. And today we're in the relationship business and women are much better at that. So I think one, we're going to see a lot more women get into the financial services space. And I think that diversity is really awesome for the industry and something that I'm very active at supporting and something I'm very, very passionate about. As far as younger advisors, again, it goes back to what I said before about if you want to be a younger advisor, there is so much opportunity. I think there's more opportunity today for young advisors than ever before, but the key is then to partner up with somebody. I think one of the challenges though in doing that is about 90% of the transactions, the mergers and acquisitions last year. So let's just take acquisitions. 90% of the acquisitions done last year were done by repeat buyers. So one of the challenges is that 30-year-old advisor that wants to make an acquisition. In a lot of cases, they have limited experience in doing that. Maybe they have limited financials to be able to do that. How do they get in to make that acquisition? They really need to partner with someone like us or another organization that has one, access to those older advisors, experience in helping them through that transaction, and then three, access to capital to help them do it. So when I look at our advisors, one, is if you want to find the younger advisor, how do you do it? You find the older advisor to create that opportunity first. So our firm is very, very active at finding those older opportunities. Part of this is just being in the business for 30 years. We've got advisors that we've retained over that entire period of time. That creates an opportunity for us, number one. But then number two, we've got a number of different methods that we're going out to find these acquisition opportunities, either through partners that we partner with or other recruiting or direct solicitation methods that we do to find these older advisors, are also just experience in the industry. So I think if we find these older advisors, it creates the opportunity for the younger advisor to get in. And that's really a way to come in and jumpstart the career. The other thing that we really see with next gen advisors is this. I think in some cases they think that sales is bad, right? So Dean and I grew up with sales. And I think some of the second and third generation advisors think that sales is bad. And I think they need to kind of reframe that. I mean, sales isn't bad. And I kind of use the analogy that if I was to buy a Rolls Royce or a Hyundai tomorrow, there's going to be a salesperson involved in both of those transactions. The way that that transaction transpires, though, is going to be very, very different. When I go in to buy the Rolls Royce, I doubt the salesperson is going to say, am I looking to lease or finance, or how much can I afford a month? Or, if we could come to a deal today, would you take delivery today? And it's the end of the month, I can give you a good deal. Those things aren't going to happen with a Rolls Royce. So I think when I look at these next gen advisors, they need to be able to sell and communicate with the clients in a fiduciary world in a very sophisticated way. So I think part of it I think one of the big keys is just to partner with an organization that can help them through that. And then I think for the organization, for us, we need to be keenly aware that next gen advisors are going to operate way differently than Dean and I did when we started in this industry. So I think the firms that are succeeding in this space, they're succeeding by listening to what those next gen advisors want. And what they want is they want I think less complexities. They want an amazing tech stack, and they want to use the tech stack. They want to be paperless, right? They want efficiencies, and they want to do all of that and grow in a way different than the way those older advisors are. We still have some older advisors that print out every email. A younger advisor is not going to do that. They want those efficiencies, and they also want the information 24/7. When we think about how when Dean and I started, the clients would get their monthly statement, and that's how they would get updates today using technology. People want that technology 24/7. So I think those next gen advisors need to find an opportunity, and I think a lot of those opportunities are going to come from a more scaled firm. And then the second thing is the firm needs to really listen to those next gen advisors keenly, and I think engage them differently than ever before. Because if they're not going to provide what that next gen advisor wants, then the firm and the advisor are not going to succeed, and that advisor is going to leave. So I think the firms that are succeeding are listening to those next generation advisors and giving them the tools and resources that they need to run the business the way that they want to run it, which is different than the way Dean and I grew up. I think COVID was one of the best things that happened to our industry. Was horrible for the economy, horrible for a lot of people, but I think it was great for financial services, for advisors that embraced the new norm. And I think part of what the new norm is, especially on the M&A side, is the ability to service clients in a very, very different way than ever before. We've done a number of out-of-state acquisitions, which I think 10 or 15 years ago, if Dean was looking to sell his practice, he'd find the advisors in his town who could potentially buy it. Today, we're finding acquisition opportunities across the country, because in a lot of cases the clients have moved all over, and using technology, we can create a client experience and support people everywhere. I don't think we're going to lose the human touch, but so much of this can be done remotely. I think that transition for advisors that did that during COVID, saying, "Hey, since we can't meet, let's meet virtually," and the clients started to enjoy that environment. And I think that that's again something that the next gen advisors really embraced, and the folks that did it saw, I think, big growth in their practices over time.
That's really interesting. I actually never even thought about that.
Yeah, I couldn't even spell Zoom 5 years ago. So David's spot on with that. And I think we're getting to the end of our podcast here, David. This has been such a wealth of information. Certainly, I learned a lot. One thing that
Obviously,
I've
same.
just, it's so complicated. There's so many different directions to go. There's so much to think about. Man, when we got into the business, we just wanted to help people invest their money, put it in a IRA, and just kind of watch it grow, do a little financial planning software, and maybe make a friend along the way. But nowadays, it's a real business. You really have to look at it like a business. You have to prepare for all the different variables in your business. And as you get later on in your career, working with a company like Gateway or similar, is you definitely should keep them on the short list of folks to talk to, and you'll certainly be smarter for it, whatever direction somebody decides to go. David, before Candace is going to have a question for you in a second, but before she asks her question, is there anything else that you wanted to cover today that you could tell somebody out there that's doesn't really know what way to go, but no, they're kind of done with the industry and they don't even know where to start? Do you have a short little tidbit for them?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is it's about embracing change. I think given how fast this industry is moving, the divergence between good and great, this divergence is happening so quickly. The big in this industry are growing incredibly quickly, and the smaller and mediocre are not. So I would really encourage people, one, embrace change and don't wait, because I think that this industry is going to look completely different in 10 years than it does today.
Yeah, back in the day when a young advisor like myself wanted to find somebody to kind of hook up with and maybe take over their practice, we just go to a conference, look for the oldest people at the conference, eating
Right.
breakfast before it starts, and go plop down next to them. That's the only way we used to do outreach.
And I feel like that's not far off still. I feel like a lot of that
It
still
still works
happens,
for
but
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's not the only difference now is that everybody's 20 years older than they were before.
Good point.
Well, David, I do have a question for you, and I actually am so excited for your answer just because I love that today's episode had so much focus on, you know, people from all different sides of the scale of like within the financial industry. We're talking about people who are trying to exit, maybe sleepwalking through the last 10, 15 years. And then we're talking about the people who are just trying to get their feet wet and figuring out where to go. So I really love this, and I really enjoyed getting to hear all of your advice towards either side of it. But I hope this doesn't come off, or maybe that it'll hit you out of left field. But if you could go back to any part in your career, whether it be the very beginning or maybe it be 5 years ago, what is something that you would do differently, knowing the knowledge that you have now through everything that you've learned, watching these new young advisors, watching these old advisors? What's something that you would have changed or done differently back when, anytime?
Yeah, I think it's I think there's always things we would have done differently, but I think part of it is to readjust the mindset. And I think I've always tried to have a mindset of, hey, let the past be the past. We've got to focus on what's going to happen in the future. I think I'll give a good example of this. I've got my pilot's license. I've been a pilot for 20 years, and I think often when things go wrong, how people react to what goes wrong and adjust to it. That's the key to the outcome, right? We can't fix what went wrong. So when we talk about flying an airplane, and when something goes wrong, they talk about aviate, navigate, and communicate. So the first thing is fly the plane. The second is navigate, find a place to potentially land if there's a bad situation, or figure out where we're going to go next. And then three, communicate. So I think when we look at problems, I think one, you know, if we take that mindset and look at that as when things go wrong, put a process in place to address it. I think that's the most important thing. When we look at what happens with flying when something goes wrong, if we're not focused on flying the plane and we're focused on a potential problem, then that can lead to other bad things. So we've got to focus on the basics first. So I think when I look back, it's more about, hey, what would you have done differently? There's always things we would have done differently, but I think to have a good mindset as to how to address the outcome, I think that's what's going to lead to the most success.
And actually, I lied. I have one more because I feel like you have a lot of good advice. So let's say, what would your elevator pitch answer be if a young advisor came up to you? They're 1 year in, maybe they're 6 months in. What would you tell them? Where would you tell them to start?
Let's start in what respect?
Just like how should they start their path into their journey into the business? Is what advice would you give them going going into it head on?
Yeah, so I think getting into the industry, I dropped out of college to get into this industry. It's all I've ever done, and I'm incredibly passionate about the industry. I love it more today than ever before. I think the next gen advisor, um, one is to partner up, find older advisors to get experience and advice from, but also look at a lot of the industry trends. I think there's so much value from attending some of the big industry conferences to see really what's going on in the industry. And when you look at the people that are there, those are the people that are growing fast. So I think I would really encourage a younger advisor, one, to find a bigger firm. I think the ability to do this business alone is quickly coming to an end, because I think that the talent and sophistication is getting way better, and I think it's going to be very hard to get up. So one, you've got to kind of accept that and find a good partner to partner with, and then look for acquisition opportunities. I think for a younger advisor today, given those dynamics of a third of our industry retiring, uh, that creates, I think, more opportunity than ever
Yeah.
for an advisor. So when we started, Dean and I needed to find those clients one at a time, because the average age of the financial advisor was our age. Today, it's old, right? So Dean and I are still, we're close, but not really at that average age. The average age of the advisor is older than us, and I see so many advisors in their 70s and even 80s. So I think that those younger advisors look for those opportunities, because that is going to be, I think, rocket fuel to grow. I don't think an acquisition is right for everybody. We've got advisors that are using White Glove and very successfully building a practice using seminar marketing. They've become very, very good at very good at closing and getting the people in the door, right? But that takes a lot of time and experience, and those advisors have some type of organic niche. If there's not that organic niche, which very often with a younger advisor there isn't, I think one of the best ways to jumpstart their career is through that acquisition or sell and stay process.
Well, thank you very much, David. Yeah, my answer would have been do seminars. Tell the young folks to do seminars.
Absolutely.
But seriously, yeah, this is all great
I'm gonna,
information.
and let me give a shameless plug from White Glove. I got a message from one of our advisors who did a workshop on 2 nights ago, and got appointments back from everybody who attended except for one. He's had tremendous success with White Glove, and
Wow.
Love to hear it.
I asked him. I specifically asked him the question last week. I said, on your investment, what type of return you're getting, and he said, I'm 4xing my return on the investment. So that looks like a pretty good investment.
Yeah, like you said, there's a lot of folks out there that feel orphaned by their financial advisor who's just kind of sleepwalking through the last part of their career. And a great way to find those folks and hook up with them are through seminars. That's certainly how we grew our financial planning practice. So, David, thank you
100%.
so much. Great
It was fun.
information. And if anybody wants to reach out to you, they know how would they get a hold of you?
They can just email me, dwood@joingateway.com, or joingateway.com is our website.
Thank you, David and Candace.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for letting us, financial industry folks really go on and on about our very complicated industry. But
I love
really
it.
Appreciate you.
It's fun. Great spending some time with both of you. I'll see you soon.
Thanks,
Thanks,
David.
David.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fast Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Have any questions or comments about the show? You can submit them on our website at whiteglove.com/fastpodcast. The views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect those of White Glove or InvestWise Financial. The content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for professional investing advice. Once again, thank you for joining us on the Fast Podcast.